to transition over to some more ornamental questions, and we have some great questions that have come in, and I'm looking forward to some of our panelists that haven't added in yet sharing with us. So the first one that I want to jump into is about the beloved hydrangea. I feel like in the world of ornamental horticulture and extension, we get tree questions, we get hydrangea questions, and that's kind of comparative to how I feel like every other question in vegetables is about tomatoes. So these are our two high volume question areas. So we have a gardener here. It says, I think she meant limelight. She put limestone, but I think she meant limelight. I think she or he, I'm not sure. I think my limelight hydrangea has spider mites. I know that I should spray it with an insecticidal soap, but isn't it too hot to do that right now? And how long can I wait to start spraying? Right? We keep preaching about effectiveness and proper timing of application. And then her final wrap up for that scenario is, if I don't spray, I'm afraid they will die. So who kind of wants to usher us into the realms of possibilities?
Well, I think I responded to that question too, and to consider, I encourage this homeowner to look a little bit closer, and let's try to make sure if we could confirm, first of all, that it's spider mites and not something else. And then we'd go forward from there, and depending on what we determined to be the pest that we need to treat, and if it turned out that we're going to use the insecticidal soap, then be able to wait for those temperatures to drop a little bit so we can get below that threshold that's really important for our plants, and not to cause any more stress on the plant, and then to be able to go from there. But there appears to be some feeding damage for sure going on there, but I'd like to look on the underside of those leaves and maybe take a hand lens and get a little bit closer look to see if I could actually see mites, or if it might be something else.
I agree. And I saw a very, very similar situation about a month ago, where initially I was like, yes, spider mites. And yes, the spider mites were present. But there were other things impacting the health of that plant, which stressed that plant, made it more susceptible to infestation by these spider mite pests. So the downfall of the plant itself really wasn't due to the spider mites. It had essentially no water holding capacity in the media that it was planted in, and they were only watering it every other day, and it was 95 degrees outside. So lots of other things can go into play. So even if we find those spider mites and know that, yes, that's an issue, let's always try to broaden that scope and look at all of the other components to each of those scenarios to see if there's anything that we can do on a management side that could help this plant have a better chance. Taylor, what do you think?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I've seen spider mites on my container hydrangeas on my porch, which completely agrees with, and we have had the kind of summer that is, once again, fabulous reproduction.
Yes, there are different types of spider mites, and a lot of them like it that hot, dry, stressful weather. We see the populations explode. And usually if you have a heavy infestation of spider mites, they are in the arachnid family. They do produce webbing. So you will a lot of times see that webbing accompany the damage. And that's in those pictures, some heavy stippling damage, which is the indicative of a similar mouth part to the mite. Now, whether it is or not, like Bob said, we need to look a little closer. I like to do the white paper test, where you take a piece of white paper and shake the leaves over the top and see what drops on it. Spider mites have 8 legs. They're really fast. A lot of times, sometimes a little reddish, and you can see them kind of crawling across the paper there. But definitely getting correct identification is going to help, because spider mites are also mites. They're not insects. So some of the applications of insecticides we would use might vary a little bit depending on what that pest actually is. And like Bob said, with the temperature, each label is going to tell you what temps are best to apply that product. So whatever you're using, always read the label regardless. You need to always be reading your label. The label is the law. We preach that a lot. Follow the label, and it'll tell you above 85 degrees, this is not effective. Above this temperature, it's not going to work. It's going to volatilize. It's going to move off site. It's not going to be effective. So always be reading the label of whatever it is you're using and making sure you're following what they recommend.
Yes, excellent, excellent recommendations. Okay, so we've got another really involved question that Lee took some time to answer for us in the spreadsheet. So I certainly want to make sure that we get to that question live today. This question comes to us from Williamson County, and it focuses on Tree Hill. And well, they start off, and thank you, by the way. They are telling us thank you for the Zooms. They've been super helpful. They even made a sweet little graphic that I want to share with y'all because it just warmed my heart to see the time that this gardener put into this. And we're glad that y'all are enjoying these sessions, and we really, again, appreciate y'all being here with us. So, well, y'all are saying thanks to us, but we're saying thank you to you. So just thank yous all around. So here we go. We're going to jump right in. The first part of this question is fall an okay time to plant 2-inch caliber oak and maple trees? And if so, what is the latest that they can be planted? So we'll start there. It's kind of a 3-part question. We might skip around a little bit, but we for sure want to start off with that. Lee, you want to take us in?
Sure, sounds great, Celeste. So, hey everyone, I'm Lee Rumble. I'm a commercial horticulturalist here and ISA certified arborist in Knoxville, Knox County, rather, I guess. And I'm glad that touched your heart too, Celeste, because I think it did mine as well. I actually panicked last night about 6 o'clock. I thought, oh no, I haven't answered my questions before 7:30 a.m. on Friday. So I thought anyone
you
that
still
left
had
us a
12
graphic-
hours.
Exactly, right? But I thought, well, with the graphic, I need to get on this. So, absolutely, fall's a great time to plant a balding burlap tree. Now, many folks would argue that, here in the Southeast, there's not a true cutoff day, right? But I do love a fall planting, especially if we're running, a good high quality mulch bed. We're putting those trees in dedicated spaces to help buffer some of those winter temperatures that would be coming. I love it. Now, if the ground's frozen, obviously we don't want to plant, right? Now, generally, bald and burlap, we're going in spring, summer, and fall would be ideal. So I would try and get them in the ground October, early November. I might try and skip December, but remember, even if we do get some cold temperatures that might be coming, and maybe you weren't able to get the tree in the ground as quickly as you thought, all of a sudden you hear we're getting a rapid temperature drop, go out and water that newly planted tree well in that soil to allow some of that moisture to retain in the ground. But again, mulches are going to be hugely beneficial here too, Celeste, to buffer those cool temps. So I don't have a specific date, but as long as the ground's not frozen, most commercial guys are planting trees anywhere from October to March,
So I want to weave a question in there. So if I know
Okay.
that we've got lots of gardeners on here who are like me and have shrubberies that they have purchased throughout this season that they have not gotten planted yet. And some of those are deciduous, some are evergreen. I have not had great success trying to keep my evergreen plants that I didn't get planted healthy and thriving through the winter months. Like they just struggle if I'm trying to save them over to plant them in the spring. So any advice on folks as far as, should we just try to get everything in the ground before winter, I guess is what I'm saying.
I would argue yes, if possible.
Yes.
I mean, especially with
Yes.
evergreens, right? Because we could pull a deciduous tree into our basement where it's dark and cool, not a big issue. Evergreen's probably not going to like that as much. Now,
Yeah.
you know this,
And I have
Celeste,
problems
but
with desiccation, right? Them like
that's
drying
where
out.
I
I
was
just
going.
can't keep them watered.
That's where I was
Yeah.
going next. Evergreens are going to photosynthesize if the sun's out and the temperatures are amendable, right? So there is more fear of desiccation, the drying out of that leaf material, especially for evergreens that are up on hillsides and greatly exposed. So we really have to monitor that watering a little more carefully with evergreens than the deciduous. But I would try and get them out, absolutely, Celeste, if possible.
And one more add-in question, I don't know, Taylor, if you have any thoughts on this part, is so think about a deciduous shrub that we're planting in the fall. They're starting to lose their leaves right now. Say we go ahead and we get it planted and then it loses all of its leaves. And I know in some people's heads are like, well, how can this be good for this plant? Because there's no leaves. It can't photosynthesize. Like, how is it going to do any amount of growing over the dormant season? Like, can you help us understand that concept maybe?
Yeah, so it's like the secret life of trees. And well, shrubs can go into that too. But when a deciduous plant drops its leaves, that's naturally occurring process. Especially when it's timely. Now we will have some deciduous plants. My cherry trees drop their leaves early every single year. And a lot of that has to do with disease problems. And so they get shot hole fungus, shot hole disease of some kind. They drop their leaves, they're stressed. That's the first thing to go. But with a deciduous plant, as it's naturally losing those leaves, it's going into a period of dormancy. Now, dormancy doesn't mean no growth. Dormancy doesn't mean stalling out. It just is a time of slower growth. And all of that photosynthesizing and growing throughout the season they have done that so they can store up what they need to make it through that period. It's like hibernation. What they like the bears, the bears, they always say which one's the fattest. They eat because they're not necessarily falling asleep for months, but they're in a slower time where they're not going out and actively foraging for food, etc. So those plants will be fine. They've done enough work, hopefully, throughout the year and the growing seasons to store up what they need to make it through that dormant period and then push out new growth in the spring.
Good explanation. And that leads us right back to the last part of that first question that we started with you, Lee, where we're focusing on watering. Walk us through the proper steps for making sure our fall planted trees and shrubs are being watered appropriately.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah. So the one thing let me mention just this because it had mentioned, I believe they had noted that water well, but not at all after the first winter. And I've not heard that part, not after first winter. Keep in mind that all of our newly planted trees are going to need consistent soil moisture until they get an established root system of their own. We know that transplant shock, once they're dug, they lose a lot of those absorbing roots. So it takes many years oftentimes to get that full root structure back. Now, the amount of water and the time we're going to need to water them, be it months or years, it's going to depend on many factors, right? The size of the tree, the slope, the drainage, our current rainfall, is there turf or mulch? So there's not a clear-cut answer, but what I'll tell you, and the University of Minnesota has a really great link, and I put those on the spreadsheet. I'll share them after I wrap up here, but when we're supplementally irrigating a tree, even for a 1-inch caliper tree, we're talking about 1.5 years before that tree is going to establish a full root system where it can, maintain itself. But if we're talking a 6-inch tree, it may be a decade before you're not supplementally watering it. Now, of course, that varies again based off of our rainfall, right? We generally like to hear 1 inch to 1.5 inches a week of rainfall is what we like. But the one part that I would definitely agree with is water well and water deep, right? But infrequently. So most of the new plantings now, and you can read this now 1 to 2 weeks after planting, they're saying water daily. That may or may not be warranted depending on rainfall, slope, textures of soils. So I usually say, every 3 or 4 days, you should really be out there with the best watering stick we have, right? The meter, our finger, digging down 4 to 6 inches, and I don't mean with a shovel. You can take a single piece of rebar or ideally a soil probe and pull a plug out and see, is there moisture in the top inch or are we truly saturated down, 4 to 6 inches in that soil layer? So it really depends, but definitely want to water them infrequently and heavily. So, yeah.
Excellent. And I tried to share the screen so everybody could kind of get a glimpse of that publication that you shared with us. And I love this chart where it's showing us, right, if you've got a caliper tree trunk that's 1 inch, this is your estimated, time for root establishment. And that's under ideal conditions, just like we mentioned.
You
So
just hit it on the head. Yeah. And can I expand 1 minute on another pertinent
Yeah,
thing real quick,
sure.
Celeste? And it's based off of what Taylor and you were just discussing. Remember, trees are big storage banks, right? They only have so many resources. So at the end of the year, when they're focusing on preparing for dormancy and they're setting fruit, well, guess what? They're going to give up on that foliage. There's no need to continue protecting foliage as you're going into dormancy. So what I always tell clients and homeowners that call me in a panic, oh my goodness, my tulip poplar's losing trees or leaves right now, right? Well, I tell them, go look out at those twigs and you'll see buds that are being set. That's next year's growth. So as long as that twig has set new buds, I'm not overly worried about, a quick or early defoliation event, if you will. Now it could indicate stress, but typically it's pretty much in response to the environment. So, and that's the only timely thing, I guess I would say, because I've started to get a lot of calls, Celeste, about, oh no, my tree's defoliating and it's only August or September. Our
yeah.
cherries took a beating this year. They were defoliated in August.
Also river birches. Have y'all noticed that? I have not seen one river birch that has more than 50% of their leaves on
It looks like fall out
True.
there, even though you guys, it's not fall yet.
It's not.
My sycamores just dropping leaves left and right. I mean, they're just like Lee said. That's the last of their worries right now. They've got other worries, and all of our plants will do this. Once the fruiting starts, less of the water and nutrients and energy goes towards producing other parts of the plant. And that's just how plants operate. They take things from the areas of less need to greater need. And so that's what's happening with those. And I would also add in with the watering, it's good. It's kind of good to think of it like a container. When you have a container plant and it outgrows that space and it's all roots in there, think of how often you have to water that, because it's mostly just root. There's not soil and moisture around it. So when we've got those plants out there and they are not able to, they've either, especially like with our street trees, they've outgrown that space. We're going to have to be supplementing with water. We're going to have to. And one thing I always preach with people is, like Lee showed and like you showed with that, Celeste, is that smaller plants and smaller trees establish faster. The bigger the plant, the longer it's going to take to build back that root system to maintain itself. And so when you start with these big trees, yes, they make an impact immediately, but you're going to have to baby that a lot longer. It's a lot longer than you probably think. And so sometimes it's good to be okay with things starting small and growing into their spaces rather than immediately filling a spot.
Hey, Lee, can I add one thing in on that tree deal too? My pet peeve, don't be pruning those deciduous trees this time of year and cutting them back, and you're worried, well, they're dropping leaves. I think there's disease. I need to go in and prune them. Let's give them a haircut now and put them under more stress. Don't be pruning this fall.
That's exactly right. Unfortunately, most of us default to fall pruning. I hear it all the time. Well, should I wait till the fall to prune? Well, can we push that back a little more? So yeah, very common, Greg. Good point.
Well, I joined the meeting on my phone because I was gonna take us outside and show us a couple images. I'm sorry about that. A couple images of our fall shrubbery and perennials that are kind of looking kind of funky right now I know that we've been getting lots of calls at the extension offices about people, worried. Is this a disease? Is this something that we need to be paying attention to? And we're running close on time, so I don't think that I'm actually going to go out and try a live on site Zoom via cell. But I will just add that, we are so close to the end of this growing season, right? And so if you have perennials that are looking rough, a few that come to mind, rudbeckias that bloomed earlier in the season, they're looking like burnt, crispy little mounds right now. Don't be worried about that. Yes, they may have looked like they had some pathogen disease issues on their leaves, but it's truly seasonal and is part of how that plant is going through the process of breaking down, right? And returning back to the soil. And so don't feel overly concerned about cleaning. Does that make sense? Like cleaning up all this this plant material. Yes, if you had a plant, especially in your vegetable gardens, fruit planting areas that clearly had leaf diseases, we need to keep culture in mind for cleanliness of those planting areas, but always in our perennial beds, that is not a super, super huge issue. So make sure that we leave stems for our cavity nesting bees and places for our beneficial insects to overwinter. We have lots of insects that like to use leaf litter, undisturbed leaf litter. Okay. So once it gets there, you know, don't be like leaf blowing it every time you turn around because that litter needs to lay there in order for them to complete their life cycles properly. So we could talk a lot more about that, but we've run out of time for today. So oh wait, Taylor's got something she wants to add.
One question that made it into the chat box and our questions that we did not answer. And
Okay.
so it is about the flying around white insects right now.
Oh yes.
And so I'm sure it's something everyone is seeing across the state. And those are our woolly aphids. And so they are aphids. If you've got a hackberry, it's probably covered in sooty mold and dripping all over your back porch or your driveway. But it is woolly aphids. So yes, they are aphids, and they are doing that piercing, sucking, eating, pooping out the honeydew, sooty mold growing on it, all the jazz that aphids do. So that was the question: is what is it?
I call it snow in September.
Yeah, snow in
Snowy
September. Yeah. It's like when the
And
cotton gets picked and the cotton's floating around. That's the similar vibe we got going on.
Okay, Greg.
Celeste, I want to make a comment. There was another one in there asking about armyworms, and I think that is a subject that we absolutely need to mention before we get gone here. I know they have been confirmed here in Cumberland County. The more high intensity your turf is, your lawn, landscape, the more likely it is a target for fall armyworms. They love that high organic, high fertility, really good rooting zone turf. And it just seems like they will target those areas. And I would tell people, the question was about overseeding and starting. I don't know that necessarily that's or establishing anew that I would worry about armyworms being there. Where I would worry is if I've got this spectacular, beautiful, tall, dense turf that I've added organic matter in, fertility's great, rooting depth, and I'm irrigating and there's plenty of moisture in the soil. That environment is really good for those armyworms to feed, move into the soil, pupate, start that life cycle over again. The key for those, scout. If you've got a landscape like what I just described, and you're an A-type personality about your turf grass, you need to be scouting it. And remember, armyworms, they'll not only feed of a morning or during the day, they'll feed all night. And they do their greatest amount of damage the last 2 days approximately of their life cycle when they're big, not the little bitty smaller larval stages. Scout. There's lots of stuff that can control those, lots of sprays. We've shared a lot of that information with homeowners. Your extension agent can get that. If you've got questions, scout.
And while I just also want to mention, because we've got differences across the regions. We have had fall armyworms in West Tennessee for going on 3.5 weeks, and it is not a huge infestation like we see some years. Yes, they're there. Yes, we're seeing damage on more highly managed turfs. But this is not one of those situations where everyone is noticing damage, if that makes sense. So I feel like that gives a little hope and promise for you who are further towards the east, because they start here and kind of work their way that way. So I think it's going to be a light year as far as damage for homeowner lawns, because the majority of folks don't have super, super high management strategies for their home lawns. So all good things to mention. Thank y'all so much for hanging on here and putting in all these wonderful questions. We have a lot that we didn't get to address today, but that's okay. They've all been answered. They're all going to go into the map. So if you submitted a question that you didn't hear the answer to today, make sure that you follow that link, go to uthort.com and look for the interactive question map, and you will be able to see those answers. Natalie, do we have any parting words?
I mean, I feel like our summation is don't go prune your trees and shrubs, go plant some fall leafy crops. So,
And what about welcome home? You want to tell
oh
everybody?
yeah, we have that too. So we hope that many of you are in counties where you may have an agent that is going to be leading the 4-part Welcome Home series, which is a teaching but also hands-on lab series where we're really just focusing all about landscapes and helping you get acquainted with gardening intimacy or learning more if you currently are doing that. So it's going to be October 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd, and we have at least 25 or 30 counties that are going to be participating. So pretty much everybody here is going to be taking part in that in various capacities. So we hope that you have the opportunity to join in with your local agent on a fun horticulture fall series.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks. We're glad y'all been joining in, and we look forward to doing this again next year. So if y'all have any thoughts or comments, please, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and let us know what we can do to make it better, a better experience, more interactive. I don't know, whatever your thoughts are. We're open to those. We certainly want this to be thriving and rewarding for both our presenters, agents, and our gardening audience. So thank y'all again. Bye.
Great weekend.